all for coming. I'd like to just begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work, and gather. I know that we're coming together from across the country, and I'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the different lands from where we're meeting. So for those of us who are part of Oxfam UQ and related circles, we're meeting on the north and south side of the Brisbane River, which is home to the Turrbal and Yagara nations. And we pay deep respects to all elders past, present, and future, and of course to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. So just some quick introductions. My name is Tanya. I'm one of the Oxfam UQ executives this year. And we've also got Harry, who's another executive. He's our Fair Trade Coordinator and will be your host this evening. So just a few housekeeping announcements to make before we get started. So just to avoid any issues with internet speed, we just like to ask you to keep your mic and your video off. And you should see that it's been automatically muted. And if it isn't, if you could please turn it off, that would be great. This event will be recorded, so you'll be sent the link in an email after the panel is over, so you can review it. And if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to add it in the chat and we'll go through it at the end. So the way it'll work tonight is that we'll start off with a little bit of background information about Fashion Revolution Week, and then we'll jump in and talk to our panelists. So I'd just like to, and then afterwards we'll go through some of the questions that you guys have gotten. So I'd like to just begin with a small introduction about the reason for our event tonight. So we wanted to put on an event in line with Fashion Revolution Week, which is a global movement dedicated to raising awareness and encouraging conscious action towards sustainability, transparency, and of course responsibility around the manufacturing and production of clothes. So a bit of history behind how Fashion Revolution Week kind of came to being. So this was a result of the response towards the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh in 2013. And so this collapse was, the factory collapse was a result of a systematic race to the bottom, where brands produce mass-produced volumes of clothing to feed customer demand for cheap at the expense of the health and safety of the people who make them and of course the environment. So 7 years on, we are in the middle of a pandemic that has again put the spotlight on the industry. And for those of you who aren't aware, in the textile industry, most brands pay after delivery, which means that a lot of these manufacturers have to pay upfront for materials and production costs. And so now what's happening as a response to the pandemic is that many fashion brands have stopped paying for orders that have already been placed and made without taking responsibility for the impact on the people in their supply chain. So while some people have received compensation, quite a few have received nothing. So tonight, what we wanted to address is, this by hearing from our panel and having a conversation about the future of sustainable fashion and how we can move forward forward towards it after COVID-19. We have an amazing panel tonight of changemakers and pioneers in the movement of sustainable and ethical fashion. And we're really optimistic that with these kinds of leaders here tonight, we can foster some really good change in the fashion industry and support social justice and ecological sustainability. With that out of the way, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and shed some light on the work they do. So we might start with you, James, from Outland Denim. James, I think your mic is up.
Yeah, you'll hear me now. It's nice to be able to be here and have this conversation with you guys tonight. James Bartle is my name, and I'm the founder of Outland Denim.
Great. Okay. Justine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Tanya, did you want me to expand and tell you a little bit more about what I've been doing as well?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Great. So my name is Justine Coneybeer. I lived in Cambodia for a couple of years and I was working in a management position in a garment producing social enterprise. Since coming back last year, I've been working with QUT and I've been working on a cotton research project. So that's been looking at strategies for improving labour conditions within the Australian cotton value chain. And I've also just started my Masters in Philosophy research, which is investigating opportunities for women in Cambodian social enterprises. I can expand a little bit more on that research so far. So the Australian Cotton Value Chain Project is a 3-phase study, and we've only just started. We're almost at the end of this first stage, which has been developing heat maps of the different labour violations in different countries. Something that I think is quite exciting about this project is essentially it's mapping the issues that we know that already exist, but we are mapping how they relate to each other along the value chain. So it's quite different in terms of we're looking at the Australian raw fibre and where it's going. So we're looking at risk upstream, which is quite different to normally what we see in the industry in terms of, retailers looking downstream and checking their manufacturers to see if there's labour violations there. We're looking upstream. So it's a little bit different in terms of risk of labour violations. And to expand a little bit on my MPhil research, I think this will become a little bit more relevant as we proceed tonight. But essentially what I saw through my experience in Cambodia, working in quite a small social enterprise, and that for people that don't know a lot about Cambodia or Phnom Penh, it's just full of NGOs and social enterprises trying to do good. But my research is looking at, okay, so what are these people doing, and how can they continue to improve on their social enterprises to create more value, to make sure that their sustainability value is all the way through, so social sustainability, eco-sustainability, and financial sustainability as well. That's an element that's really important as well, because these organizations can't continue to do social good if they're not financially sustainable either. So that's a little introduction to my MPhil research too.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We might circle back to James. Sorry, I just kind of missed out on asking you to expand. If you could please chat a bit more about what you do, that'd be great.
No worries. All right, you set us all up, Justine. As I said, I'm the founder of Outland Denim, and Outland Denim was started nearly 10 years ago by my wife and I, and we work in Cambodia also. I was motivated to set something up after going to the movies and watching the Liam Neeson film Taken, where I was made aware of human trafficking for the first time, and I was shocked. And the next couple of years following that, I went on a journey to learn more about human trafficking, and eventually had the opportunity to travel with a rescue agency into Southeast Asia. And it was on that trip that I saw a young girl for sale, and it was a life-altering moment for me, seeing just how scared and intimidated she was. Researching the problem, it just really highlighted the fact that this was an economic problem. Huge amounts of women are made vulnerable, men as well, all the way around the world, even here in Australia, due to poverty. And that is one of the greatest causes of leading to human exploitation in the ways that we see happening in Cambodia. So our job is to work alongside the NGOs that Justine has just talked about. And after they identify and rescue young ladies, our job is to be able to offer an opportunity to them to be able to be trained into a career, and then have an education around the gaps that they might have, and earn living wages, which is very different to minimum wages. And so by combining all of these things into our social impact model, we've seen women get themselves, not because of our work, but because of their own, get themselves out of poverty, their families out of poverty, and the impact that that then goes on to have on a community. So it's gone well beyond anything we ever imagined. We launched our brand only 3.5 years ago, and because of those foundations and the unique place that we found ourselves in the market at the right time, we garnered a lot of retailer support quite early on. We launched in Australia here with David Jones, and then we went to Canada, where we launched with Harry Rosen's Hot Renfrew, and we've just launched in the US with Nordstrom and Bloomingdale's. We've been supported by incredible celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio, Meghan Markle, and others. And we're seeing that consumers now more than ever are willing to back and support any brand that is actually making a difference and is a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We might go over to you, Jane. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about what you do?
Yeah, that's very impressive, James, what you've done in such a short time. And Justine, great to hear more about your research as well. I'll just share a few slides. I just put a few things together here just to talk about what I do. My arising was kind of more from the grassroots where I was in Australia. I just had observed fashion waste and didn't like what I saw and didn't relate to it because it wasn't how I lived. So, you know, to me, it was just about my background in journalism and agricultural science meant that I just thought, well, I'll just start where I am, use what I have and do what I can. So I was also had been making my own clothes. I'd done some leadership training, which had sort of shown me how to create change. And, you know, I just decided to, you know, go with my values and do what I could to make a difference, not on the global sphere, but more just from individual actions and behaviour change, and our choices are what make a difference. So then, you know, I noticed fashion waste in 2011, and it was 2013 that I was doing this study. And then in 2014, I just spent the whole year reusing what already existed around me and focusing on natural fibres. So, you know, it's just been a series of things from there. Because of my background, I love natural fibres, and I was a bit shocked as part of my early work to see how much polyester is in the supply chain. You know, 2/3 of clothes are derived from petroleum. And then Dr. Mark Brown's research came out where he showed that polyester clothes are shedding microplastic into the ecosystem. So the more I looked into it, the more, you know, horrifying the problem became. And really it comes down to, you know, what Albert Einstein said, that you can't solve problems by doing the same kind of thinking that created them. And, you know, that's what James has done. He's come up with a solution to do something different. My solution was really about thinking about clothes in a different way as the wearer of clothes, thinking about, you know, how we can choose, wear and care for them so they bring meaning, value and joy to our day, rather than us always chasing something new and different. And it was thinking about clothes doing for us on the outside what food does inside, you know, protecting our body and how we feel about them. So I've written a book called Slow Clothing, which is really about dressing for health and well-being rather than status and looks. And it's based on these actions that, you know, I've sort of came up with the manifesto in 2015, and just it's had a few tweaks since then, but it's basically stayed the same, of just about thinking more, choosing natural fibres, buying quality, local or clothes with a good story to tell, and just having a few, looking after what you've got, learning to make and mend and revive and adapt and salvage so that, you know, you reduce waste. And really the way to get into it is just to really stop buying for a while, study what you need, sort what you've already got, and then seeking out responsible choices from there. So, yeah, that's just a little way of introduction. And I did actually I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship to travel overseas and look at the way that our own hands-on upcycling can help reduce textile waste and enhance well-being. But because we can't travel, I've had to morph that into a virtual Churchill, which I've called Arising from Disruption. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for that. We might move on to you, Nina. You wanted to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nina, And I was just going to have a basic introduction, but I think Justine set the bar so high. So what I'll do is to put into context my work, because I do several different things within the sustainable fashion space. I'll just talk a little bit about my journey and how I got here so that when I explain what I do, it all makes sense. So I, kind of like James, interestingly enough, I think I have film to blame for being in the sustainable fashion space because I've always loved movies, I've always loved film, and since I was a little girl, my mom and my brothers, we used to watch a lot of classical films from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's where my love for style kind of initiated, you know, watching screen goddesses like Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly. And I fell in love with clothing and vintage clothing. So I had another experience when I was 5 years old, about 5 years old. There's an infomercial where they showed a country with people who were in extreme poverty. I don't know if it was war ravaged or something like that. And I'd never seen people so grief stricken before in my young life at the time. And I was screaming at my parents, like, do something about it. Those people are about to die. And they were explaining to me that those people are on the other side of the world. They were in a famine or a drought or a war situation, things like that. And I couldn't understand. So I thought, okay, when I grow up, I'm going to go to those places and find a way to help those people. And so fast forward to, so I grew up in the States, by the way. And when I was a teenager, my family, we moved to Africa. I moved back to Africa, I should say. And I remember seeing, that's the first time I saw poverty firsthand. And, you know, got to asking a lot of questions. But something else I noticed with one particular ethnic group is that they were traditionally farmers, and the women did a lot of the farm work and looked after the children and the households and the husbands as well. And this made me realize that in order to change the world, alleviate poverty, that women need to be empowered. You need to help women because the trickle-down effects are really powerful. That when women are empowered, the children get looked after, the children get educated, and that kind of spurs on, has ripple effect and implications onto the community, the society, and of course the rest of the nation. So that kind of became my goal as well. And right about when I was 15, and this was in Africa as well, I remember passing by an op shop, and this was one of my first experiences with an op shop. And typically I wouldn't go into one before because I wanted to be trendy like the other girls in my high school. However, they had in the window a vintage dress from a film called Gone with the Wind, which is an absolute classic. And that is really essential because it drew me into the op shop. You know, it's a vintage dress. And in the op shop, they had a mix of contemporary clothes and vintage clothes. So for the first time, I started to play dress up. And I think that was the moment that my career as an eco-stylist was born, even though I didn't realize it at the time. So I stopped caring about following trends and trying to get validation like other teenage girls in my high school, because I had my own thing. I developed my own individuality and self-esteem through that. And so I organically became a stylist because people would always ask me, I love your style, you look so different, can you help me with my wardrobe? So that sort of happened that way. Now, I still had this, one thing I also noticed was that in Africa, now these were clothes that were sent, oversupply that was sent to the West. So we all know that, you know, clothes in op shops that don't get sold get sent to developing countries. And what was happening is the local fashion and tailoring industries was kind of depleting, had depleted. People were making their own clothes, people used to wear traditional attire, and they were no longer doing this because of all the cheap, mostly polyester clothing that was being imported. And so there was a lot of job loss, I noticed, and there was also a lot of waste. Because one thing people don't realize is that in a lot of these African countries, they don't do landfills. They have, you know, like Justine's background, it's just mountains of trash where it gets mixed up with household trash and all sorts of things. And these are in residential areas. And whenever you pass by them, it absolutely reeks. And so I saw this at age 15 as a problem, but I back then, I don't really think there was a sustainable fashion industry that I knew of. So I just kind of, well, I just felt there was nothing I could do about it at the time. I ended up moving to the UK and studying international development because for me, that was a way that I could work on poverty alleviation globally, potentially with the United Nations. That was what I hoped for at the time. And when I lived in the UK, I happened to live in a neighborhood where there were about 12 op shops on one street. And for me, that was absolute paradise. So I continued op shopping and eco styling along with doing other types of work. And I moved to Australia about 4.5 years ago in 2015. And just as I moved, I don't know if you guys have seen the True Cost documentary came out. And that was when I started to focus more on the environmental side, not just the social justice and human side, because I realized that it's not just at the end of line that fashion is being destructive. It's actually in manufacture and even agriculture. So I started to do a lot of research and learn more about these issues and incorporate them in my work. So now what I do is I teach short courses at RMIT. I give a lot of sustainability workshops and events. I've been running clothes swaps for about a decade now since I lived in the UK. And there are other projects I'm looking to do in the future, moving on with that. But just to round it up, what I surmised from living in different continents and countries is that I try to approach things more holistically and looking at things internationally with regards to solving problems, because I think that one of the reasons fashion is so wasteful and also full of so many injustices is because for probably decades, possibly even centuries, we've had this concept where we follow fashion trends. And I think that is potentially the root cause of all fashion evils, in my opinion, because we've stopped being individuals and approaching fashion or clothing rather as something that's personal and individual and seeking external validation. And that's what we're taught to do through trends. And this concept we're pretty much born with it. You know, we hear about trends through entertainment news, through conventional news. It's just through advertising, social media. And I think if we shift that back to the individual and be more introspective with what we put in our bodies, I think that then we'll buy less and use the clothes that we have for far longer. So that's my approach to it. And also thinking more globally about when we're trying to solve these problems. Of course, yes, definitely acting locally and thinking locally, but thinking about, okay, this is a solution that I think will work, but how does it impact people on the other side of the world as well? And of course, women, because I think clothing is a ubiquitous thing. We all wear clothes. So whether you're into fashion or not, it's such a beautiful way to engage human beings, any human, about these issues, because it's no longer about beauty and art. It's actually political, it's economic, it's legislation. So that's sort of my approach to my work and how I do it. Now, in terms of being a stylist, yes, because of the films I grew up with, I do love colors and clothes that are quite attractive and engaging, but I use that to engage people in conversation about these issues. It's not always necessary, but you do find that with fashion, one of the reasons it's so incredibly popular and attractive is that it's beautiful, you know, it's artistic. And so when I post on social media or when I write blogs, I use outfits to kind of captivate people so that, you know, I can talk about things of higher value.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that. That was really insightful. We might move on to Pemba. If you'd like to introduce yourself, talk about what you do, that'd be great.
Thank you, Tanya, and hi, everyone. My name is Pemba, and I'm the founder of the Kilimanjaro Craft. So the Kilimanjaro, it's the highest mountain in Africa. Why did we decide to call our business the Kilimanjaro? The idea was, if you're on top of the mountains, you can actually see everywhere. So we wanted to raise people when people were hopeless, and we wanted to give them hope. So a little bit of my story. I was born in the Congo. I grew up in Tanzania. So I came to Tanzania as a refugee. So my whole childhood, I started in the refugee camp. I never had a book when I was at high school. And I was lucky to get a scholarship. So that's how I went to uni and I started town planning. So every day I used to think about other people who could have been the way I was before, but I was lucky because of the scholarship to be able to study. I traveled around the world, but this is because of the education that I got. But I know other people are very talented, but they didn't got the chance that I was able to get. And the first practical question was, what do I do in order to get other people going to school? What do I do in order to help people whom I know that they're talented, they're good tailors, they're good fashion designers, but they don't have the market? So in trying to solve all those questions, the practical one was actually to start a business. I was lucky to have a sister who's a great designer. She's a great fashion designer, but she wasn't a good business lady. So I started doing business when I was 12. I was selling peanuts, and I've been doing the business all these years. So I was like, okay, let's do something together. You do the clothing, I do the business, and we get other people on board. And we started our very small business with only my sister and 5 people. And after 1 year, we get more people. We started in the Congo, and now we are in 5 countries in Africa. So we have 50 crafters in 5 countries. And we donate 50% of our profit to 3 projects. So we fund sports and music in the refugee camp in Tanzania, where I grew up. We also fund access to education, and we have our first university student who will be graduating next year in civil engineering. And we also fund, we do a lot of funding in the music as well. You may not be aware of people who live in the refugee camp, the way we feel bored after being in the confinement in our homes for just a couple of weeks. That's how the lives in the refugee camps is, because people have been living, if it's like 10 kilometers square, they've been living there for 20 years because you're not allowed to leave that place. But getting people to do some sports and music and all of this, they need funding. So the best way to do that for us, it was through fashion. But it was not only about doing fashion, but it was also doing an ethical one, which is not easy in developing countries where the salaries are quite very low and there's not enough resources for small business like us. But we were lucky enough, we started quite very small, and by talking with different crafters, we got crafters who joined the business. And at the moment, our business has started really growing quite very well. And when we started, we wanted to reduce, of course, the waste after making the clothing. But it was quite very difficult because we had our team that was making the jewelries and handbags. Our team was based in Rwanda and in Tanzania, and the clothing were made in Congo. So all the remaining pieces didn't have a place to go. So after 1 year, we actually managed to build a supply chain so that all the remaining pieces from the Congo could be shipped to Rwanda as well as in Tanzania in order to produce other accessories. So when we talk about fashion, about sustainable fashion, it's all a matter of, it's about, as the businesses trying to do the right things, as well as it's about consumers. Consumers, they need to do some research about what they buy. Because if they buy ethical products, they'll actually encourage us who produce ethical products because it's a little bit more expensive. So we need the supporters, and consumers, they need to do those researches so that they can buy the products that are ethical, as well as supporting the businesses like what James is doing and what Nina is doing and all of us here. So we need, that's a collaborative actions between the consumers and the manufacturers and the businesses, men and women as well. So that's pretty much about my business and about me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So we might move into a couple of questions for the panelists. So we might start with, what are some of the biggest challenges you guys are kind of facing when you're trying to create a B Corp or a social enterprise, or trying to tackle fast fashion? And yeah, so what are some of the challenges that the biggest challenges that you guys have been facing so far? We might just start with you, James.
Yeah, well, Pemba, that was great. I've heard you speak before, and your story is very compelling. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from you. There's so many challenges when you're trying to tackle issues like this. And I think, cash flow has got to be at the top of everybody's list, I would think. This is an area that has lacked innovation for a long time, and it's just been allowed to continue as it was, and therefore creating the problems that we see today. But really, that's also created huge opportunities for businesses like ours and social enterprises like ours to be able to innovate and create genuine solutions. So that's where I see cash flow as being one of the greatest challenges, because we are motivated to see change, and we can see how it can happen even. But being able to fund something like that when you're up against the big brands, and consumers have been somewhat brainwashed, that's the reality, all of us have been to a degree, in that, we should be able to have a pair of jeans, let's say, for $30. Well, when you're battling that, it's very hard to then win customers as well. So you need something very unique and very compelling to be able to draw and takes any kind of market share from the big brands.
Yeah, absolutely. What you said with brainwashing, kind of hits home. There is quite a lot of greenwashing that we see these days as well, with brands trying to pretend to be sustainable. But yeah, thank you for your response. We might hear from you, Justine. What are some of the challenges you've kind of seen in your work?
So I can sort of speak from my experience working with small, and I'm talking very small, enterprises in Cambodia, and it'd be very interesting to hear the opinions from the other panelists as well. But basically, what I saw when I was working in a social enterprise was, yes, all these sort of common issues, money, yada yada yada, but also establishing a solid foundation and framework to actually really understand the issues. So, setting up all these systems, trying to understand from the very beginning what do you do with waste? If you don't even know, if you don't have a system to try and figure out what to do with the scraps, what would be a system to at least, separate them or do something that's going to add value in some way. So I think what I found in my research is there's always these sort of failures where we have these good intentions, which are, obviously that's awesome, but we don't have the resources to sort of see them through. So, through my initial research, and I'm at the very, very beginning, but I think a lot of common approaches to women's empowerment has been this measurement of labor participation, which is really good. Seeing women have an income is very important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that income is being used for themselves. So it's sort of making all these assumptions without understanding the context. And that was what I saw as a failure within the social enterprise that I was working with, as well as other social enterprises, just not really wanting to do it, but just not having, again, the money to put into this sort of research, because this is not just a simple problem that you can solve with a few quick fixes. It's this deeply entrenched issue. And especially in Cambodia, I think there's a lot of cultural issues there, with the Khmer Rouge, that, it takes a very detailed approach. And it's what it sounds like with James, you said that you started off with this foundation and, you've been able to go from there, which is sort of my understanding of kind of thinking about my research. Yeah, that's what these places are missing, is this foundation to start off, to really understand their staff. So that's why I kind of come from this resources perspective of okay, we don't how much do we know about how to fix this problem? What more can we find out? How do we balance this, you know, the eco, the environmental, the environmental, the social, and the financial. So yeah, again, these resources.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely it is something really important to focus on as well when we're trying to tackle the problem. So it was really, really informative. Thank you for that. We might move to you, Jane. Some of the biggest challenges you faced in what you do.
Yeah, well, I guess I just stepped into the arena. I don't come from fashion, so I actually didn't really have any understanding of these, you know, the system problems there. All I could talk about is really my experience as a wearer of clothes. And so I had done a lot of different jobs in my life, and I just wanted to be able to find voice around the things that I could talk about that I saw were not right. And I must say, since I started, you know, full time on this in 2013, I've been quite horrified with what I hear about the way that the industry operates. And also it helps me continue on the path, because I just think I'm independent voice here. I'm just speaking to my own values, which informs everything I do. You know, it's about being authentic, being creative, being autonomous, and having a purpose. So I'm just doing purpose-driven work and finding that there is a need to educate and inform about, you know, and kind of like expose the horrors of it. And, you know, it's fabulous to see the work of Fashion Revolution evolving as well over time. And I'm on the Australian committee there, even though, you know, I feel I'm not from fashion. I'm talking about something different to fashion. And I totally relate to Nina's point, because I could not understand. I never followed trends, and I couldn't understand why there was all this pressure to follow trends. And it's actually marketing pressure. It's about people trying to sell you stuff, exploiting on the one hand people and resources, and you know, increasing consumption to the point where it's clearly irresponsible. And so my jump off point was, I thought, well, all I can do is work with what I know, and I've just come from the ground up, and I just keep saying it. And I guess I've had, you know, in terms of, like, the question was actually about how do we personally reward ourselves, and, you know, I've just diminished the priority on money in my life, you know, so I have had to compromise income to achieve the change that I want to see. And I mean, it's just the stage in my life that I'm at. My children are growing up, you know, and I'm focused on the life that there will be for my grandchildren. But, you know, so I just think it's sticking true to your values and your purpose, and you just have to keep going and appreciate the small gains along the line. That's really probably all I can say.
It was amazing. Thank you for that. Definitely, we do see with what James had also brought up as well, that you're facing big companies, big corporations, and sometimes it's not just about the fashion. It is other big factors, political factors, economic factors that are kind of contributing to the problem. So yeah, hopefully we can expose the horrors in the industry. That'd be great. We might move to you, Nina. Some of the biggest challenges that you're facing.
Right. Kind of a couple that sort of echo through what some of the panelists have mentioned, and obviously finance, because this, for me, it's much like what to Jane's point. For me, this is a life purpose and a mission, right? The advocacy work that I do and the activism work, it's not. I don't even see what I do as a business, even though people call it a business. I do, you know, I style clients and things like that. But for me, it's like where my life experiences have specifically brought me to. And the challenge in that is that even though I love it and it gives me absolute fulfillment. What people don't understand is ethical and sustainable fashion is nearly a brand new industry on its own. So yes, it's like an offshoot of fashion, but it's not really, because it you know, like I mentioned earlier, involves a lot of politics and activism and social justice and all the other things that go along with it. But because it's brand new, and I guess in a sense you can call people who have been working in this industry for a few years pioneers, there's a kind of perspective, a mainstream perspective about sustainable fashion, that it's sort of linked to charity, it's linked to not-for-profit, and so that makes, for some strange reason, people don't create jobs in that sector so easily. Whenever I get asked to speak at events and panels, and not panels, events, and do workshops, but people don't feel that they should pay you for their work. I get asked to write documents and help people in, well, what you'd call consultation, but they don't feel they should pay for it because you're doing, you know, charity work, and I don't know, you should volunteer for it. So that's a big challenge, getting people to see the value in what we do. But having said that, I can see that it's shifting now that, you know, the mainstream, and also thanks to the climate change movement, which ethical sustainable fashion is a part of, people are beginning to value it a lot more. So that's shifting. I have done other jobs, but I get very little fulfillment. I get bored and I get frustrated, and I think, oh, I just want to quit and do what actually gives me fulfillment. So I've had that dichotomy for a few years. The other challenge with it is, part of my work is, you know, obviously getting people to reuse, recycle, restyle, and so on when it comes to textiles and clothing, but I'm always also advocating for ethical brands. It's a big part of what I do. And, you know, like we mentioned earlier, people are so brainwashed about fast fashion, right? Because, you know, they are able to spend billions on marketing and advertising. So it's challenging to kind of pull the right thing to do. But at the same time, you know, that sort of conditioning is hard to, it's hard to shift because it's so very ingrained in our culture. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think we are seeing a trend that it is a deeper social issue than just simply our clothes and fashion. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And to you, Pemba, would you like to tell us about some of the biggest challenges you faced in your work?
I think as a panelist, they've quite said it all. Maybe I can just say one of the biggest challenge at the moment that I really feel it. Yeah, like what James and Nina said. The biggest challenge is the cash flow, and that has to do with in one side you have the pressure from customers who really want ethical products. And you also have that social responsibility that you have to produce something like that. But the product you produce, they definitely have to be very expensive. So assume that if I sell a shirt that's made in Africa, that would be at least 60 Australian dollars. But if you go to Target, you can get a shirt for $7. So you really need a lot of courage to actually get someone who will be able to pay that $60 to buy your shirt. And you also don't want to produce a shirt that will cost $20. That's not ethical. So you have that pressure on you, and you need to balance that. But in terms of where do you get, like, in terms of the earnings, for me, I don't do these Kilimanjaro crafts in order to get money. I work as a town planner, so that's where I get my salary. So I do this, and I consider my payment is satisfaction. Our business vision is actually to make people smile. So if I see people smiling, that means I'm well paid. Even if I make hundreds of thousands of money, as long as people are not smiling, that means I didn't get the salary that I signed this business for.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. It is, as we can see, pretty difficult to create change. But yeah, thank you for your response. We might move on to kind of addressing how the coronavirus has impacted sustainability. So what are some of the more positive changes that you guys might be seeing or practicing yourself with regards to consumer behavior during sort of social distancing? So we're seeing a lot on the news how people are saying the skies are a lot clearer, or animals are returning to kind of parks and everything. Do you see people kind of becoming more aware of the amount of pollution and waste they're causing during this kind of social distancing period? We might start with you again, James.
Look, you know, this pandemic is devastating for so many people, and I certainly don't want to take away from the hardship that so many people are going through, and we're not exempt from either. There is economic challenges that we are also facing as a brand. But if I'm to focus on some positive side effects of COVID-19 for a moment, I would say that yes, you can apparently see the sky in India, and apparently you can see through the water in the canals in Venice, and we're seeing these environmental, you know, wins, which proves that industry has to be changing and shifting in the way that we produce everything that we produce. So I think that's an absolute win for a brand like Outland Denim. We exist because of the people on the planet, and so this is just another opportunity for people to, I guess, be further convinced of the need for business to operate in the way we do. On a social impact level, you know, for us, we sent our staff home. There's a huge impact on the costs of running a business, sending your staff home and continuing to pay them. But in a country like Cambodia, there is no welfare for them to fall back on. And it is the responsibility of the employer to do everything we can within our power. And obviously employers get to the end where there's nothing more they can do. But for Outland Denim, we started for those people. And so it's very, this is just another great opportunity for us to be able to demonstrate our love for them and our commitment to them. On another opportunity, though, that exists as a result of COVID-19 is that our digital channels have been, our sales have been increasing. Yes, because people are at home and probably have more time, but also I would like to believe because people are now more aware of the social and environmental needs that are facing us. And so we are seeing our community rally and support our brands, where we have seen only increase in our digital channels since COVID-19. I also think that, you know, this won't change the masses. I don't think that we're going to see all the fast fashion consumers suddenly change and shift gears into going from a $30 jean to a $200 jean. But I do think that a percentage of them will. I know with our brand, we've been able to see that we can bring a customer who would average spending $80 to $100 up to spending $200. And equally as hard, if not harder, we've also been able to bring customers that would spend $400 on a jean down to $200. And so I think what that demonstrates is that that consumers in all categories are wanting to be a part of the solution. And during COVID-19, I think we're still seeing money get spent, but spent on meaningful things, things that might have purpose and hope attached to them, which is what we're trying to create in every product we produce at Outland Denim. So as devastating it is, there is also some incredible opportunity that exists in a time like this to be able to carve out new ground and come out the other side of COVID-19 as a much stronger business.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's good to hear kind of some of the positives coming out of COVID-19. Yeah, thank you for that. Justine, did you have anything to add?
Oh, well, that was very inspiring, James. That was really wonderful to hear. Yeah, look, I'm sort of in a study hole for the last year, so I'm not on the front line so much, and I feel like I have sort of lost a little bit of the connection in terms of consumer behavior with all this desktop research. But Look, one thing that I really noticed at the very beginning was people were constantly using this, you know, shop local hashtag, and you know, I really think the more that we expand that idea, the better, to start thinking about these smaller brands that are doing the right thing, you know, whether it's just locally in Australia, or using you know, choosing to go with a manufacturer that, you know, does the right thing as well. So I quite like that, seeing the shop local hashtag around as well. One thing I'm sort of hoping but have really no grasp of is, you know, because so many people have, you know, their incomes have gone down, they're not working as much, or they've lost their jobs, will people start to consume less because of that? And, you know, if they are forced to sort of consume less, will they then realize that they don't actually have to consume as much in terms of the fast fashion, you know, consumers? So that's sort of me hoping, but I couldn't really say much more to that. I think one other thing that I was just going to mention, which is really more about, you know, my friendship circles and colleagues, is for me, this has really just made me face the reality of my privilege even further, because I mean, we're just so insanely lucky here in Australia, that we have, you know, we have these systems where we can fall back on. But yeah, definitely, you know, knowing the people in Cambodia, the relationships I have there, it's very difficult. If they lose their job, then, you know, most of the time they've never been afforded the ability to even save money to prepare for such an event. So we really are just so lucky, and we need to sort of try and think about this further to recognize how we can support these people. And it's what is amazing about that with ethical fashion is you can support these people, and you can get, you know, a new pair of jeans from that. You can still get what you want, and support these people, which is really, you know, what's so great about ethical fashion and what I keep trying to tell people about. So yeah, that's sort of my take on. Oh, one more thing, actually. Hopefully people are revisiting their wardrobes, because I know I found old favorites from a couple of years ago, and you revisit that stuff, and you stitch things and you fix things. People have kind of got time now to fix their clothes. So hopefully, again, that's wishful thinking. People are sort of finding things to do, and making their clothes last longer.
Yeah, definitely. I see that myself, and in my own friend group, people kind of picking up just new skills, things like, mending, sewing, and just kind of sort of become more aware that they don't actually need that many clothes, given, of course, you don't really go out much. But yeah, thank you for that. Jane, we might head over to you.
Yes. I really admired hearing James's story about how he's sent his workers home and is still paying them. And, you know, that is the gold standard about how these things should work. But it's very disturbing hearing what's happening in other countries like Bangladesh, for example. And, you know, that's just so terrible. And I don't know what we can do about it. And I think we haven't even heard the extent of it yet. And I think we need to know it, and we need to hear about the good stories, you know, so we can wear a good story, rather than putting our money somewhere where, you know, it is exploitative. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, and I do think, Justine, you're right, it's a bit of wishful thinking, but, you know, I really feel as if there's been a big shift in terms of our home. We're suddenly valuing this. We've got a forced slowdown, and we're really reevaluating what our priorities are. Our desire for sort of frivolous fashion, I think, has just evaporated because, you know, we're not needing to dress up or show off as much. You know, there's a lot more heart in what we see in social media now about how we're coping and caring. So, you know, lockdown is really a reset. And I think personally, I've been out in the garden a lot. You know, I've been just doing those everyday skills that the homemaking skills that have been so devalued are suddenly arising. And so I do think we will see some profound change over time, and, you know, we'll be more resourceful. And, you know, as money is tight for everyone, we'll be, you know, valuing what we've already got and re-looking at that, shopping our own wardrobe, upcycling and mending and all of those skills that are actually quite soothing and mindful. You know, there's a lot of benefit there instead of racing off and buying something new. So I do think that there will be sustained change come out of this, because it's the first time in lifetimes that people have actually been forced to stop and reflect on how they live their lives and what they value.
Yeah, it's good to hear that there is potential for kind of good to come out of it. And yeah, people becoming more mindful and kind of making their wardrobe a bit more personal. Thank you for that. Nina, we might head over to you. Some of the challenges or some of the things just observed with regards to COVID.
So in terms of positive things, I think I have been seeing a lot of people, obviously people are home. A lot of people on social media have been saying they're bored. So many of them have been going into their wardrobes and doing spring cleaning and clearing out their wardrobes, which, like yourself, I see that they're finding brand new things. In other words, they're shopping their wardrobes, which is fantastic. Obviously, we hope that that continues after the pandemic is over and the restrictions are lifted, that they continue with that thing of re-wearing things that they had. There's a lot of restyle garment challenges on Instagram, which is fantastic, because the thing with those challenges and those hashtags is that they engage people who are not into sustainable fashion. It's just a fun thing to do, but through that they realize that, oh, they pick up a new skill and realize that, oh, I can continue doing this. So that's really good. Moreover, more people on social media now because we're not working. However, with regards to the pandemic, and obviously in the wake of it, we don't want to disregard or diminish how serious it is and how much people are suffering and what's going on. However, on the other side of it, the gem that I think we can get from this experience at the end of the day, hopefully, is that this has been a rare and unique opportunity, completely unprecedented, that we can introspect as individuals, but also as a community, as a culture, as a society, and think about coming up with entirely new structures and systems and models in fashion for sure, but in other areas of our lives as well, like food and tech. Consumption is a big thing. You know, we've been talking about consumption, but we realize that our consumption patterns, sometimes when you're talking about consumption in fashion, you can almost even replace the word fashion with food or tech. There's something about our modern society that we've just latched onto this thing that we have to overconsume for whatever reason. Well, we know why. It's because, you know, it amasses wealth for big companies. But having said that, this is a time for us, now that we're forced to stop and slow down, this is a time for us to think about, after the pandemic is lifted, what kind of future do we want moving forward? Because we're overstressed, we're overworked. Nothing was really working if you think about it. People were just, a lot of mental health issues because we're just going too fast. We're like consuming just to get a short-term high, to get over the fact that you're exhausted or you're not happy or whatever it is. So I think for me, that's certainly in my own life, that's been something that I've been able to take a moment, reflect, and think about what I want to do and how I want to move in the future. But I think hopefully we can all collectively start thinking about newer models for how we consume, you know, how we approach government, how we approach buying, consuming, disposing clothing in the future. So that's been a little bit of a positive for me. As well as talking about the idea that we're lucky in Western countries that we have the ability to, you know, have our space and be hygienic and protect ourselves. Well, most of us do protect ourselves from, you know, being contagious or being infected with this pandemic. However, you know, that's not the case with so many people around the world. So, and also because, you know, people have lost jobs, we're forced to consume less by default. And if we really think about it, maybe that could be a way to empathize with people in this country and in other parts of the world who don't have as much, who've never had that opportunity. And they've always been forced to be sustainable anyway and be less wasteful. And I think moving forward also, we can acknowledge and sort of learn from people who have always been sustainable and maybe adapt to those ways of being, you know, as the new standard and the new normal, and also give credit to them for having lived like that or having had to be sustainable where we've been so wasteful. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is inclusivity, you know, a little bit more inclusivity, just purely through empathy because of what we've experienced as a world, as a planet.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much for that. And Pemba.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's really, we live in a very tough moment, and as the business, our sales have actually decreased by 70%, which is very terrible, given like the amount of people that we support back in Africa. And like it's just hard because some of our crafters, for example, these are the people who, if we don't buy their products, they don't get food to eat. And now they're supposed to stay at home because they have to be confined, but they can't afford buying food. So now they're facing two challenges between malnutrition as well as corona. So they have to make a choice either to go outside or to stay inside. So this is like one of the big challenge that this whole thing came with. But also, I always love to find hope in a desperate place. I felt so transformative when I go through hardship. So times like this, they're the most engaging times for us to change and to become the new persons. And something that I've realized, despite the challenges, the loss of hope and so on, we didn't get much sales, but something that's very special is the amount of offers that we started getting from people. I remember back in Africa, some of our crafters, because they can't buy the raw materials to actually produce the garments or the beads to make the earrings and so on. So I just made a few phone calls from some of our suppliers and explained the situation. And these guys, they just accepted. For every one of our crafters, they can actually go to their shop and take the raw materials that they want. And we will pay them in October. So this was a very special offer for us. And there is something that I feel it's something that's likely to happen with this at the end of this pandemic is, for the first time, people have realized that your actions can actually have a big impact to someone's life. So now everyone feels you are responsible for yourself, but you are also responsible for someone's safety. It could have been very difficult to explain this without these kind of situations. So now we feel it's your problem, but it's also my problem. If I don't act responsibly, I can actually spread the virus. And I hope, like by the end of this, we'll also act the same on the way we treat the environment, because we'll be able to understand that this problem connects all of us. And I really like 2 points from Justine and Jen about people's consumption. I remember in 2018, I decided to spend the whole year I didn't buy any clothing. I didn't buy any shoes for the whole year. And I had enough stuff in my closet to wear. So sometimes we spend a lot than what we need. But spending 6 weeks at home, you don't change that much. I feel like by the end of this, you will actually be able to learn. And probably I sell clothing. I would love people to buy more, but I'm also conscious that people buy more than what they need.
Yeah, thank you for that. Hopefully, yeah, once this COVID period has passed, we do see some bigger changes in the community. Thank you so much for all your responses. Just in the interest of time, we might just open it up to the Q&A, and I'll hand over to Harry.
Hey everyone, thank you for coming. We've got a few questions in the chat. So we'll start with one from Iskra. She just asked, so she lived in Japan for a while and there was no concept of sustainable fashion. So she's wondering how we can change that, and particularly, yeah, when it's like not a concept that's recognized outside of, I guess, Australia as much. So yeah, in those East Asian countries, there's been a lot of upper middle class rising, there's a lot of consumerism. How can we get them into more sustainable fashion paths? Anybody wants to answer that one?
I could probably potentially speak to my opinion on this. This is only opinion. This isn't anything that's proven. But I believe that by proving it as a successful business model, that you will have influence into other countries as well, into that this is a more, I guess, accepted kind of fashion. It's like's already been spoken tonight, that this is nearly like its own, you know, well, it's a subculture of fashion, I guess. And I really think that we have a pretty unique opportunity, and that it will be marked in history as the time when things did change, because I think that comes down to it's well, so many people, but like what Jane's been doing for her career in this space, and raising awareness, and so many others raising awareness to now where we have the media speaking about it. And there isn't one fashion magazine you'll buy, or probably even nearly newspaper today, that isn't speaking about these issues. And so they're just becoming more and more popular. And as they get the airtime, it's the same thing that happened with fast fashion, that over time we were just led to believe that this is the right thing, this is how we should do it, this is okay to do it. And I hope that that ethically and sustainably produced fashion has the same outcome as we've seen with fast fashion. I know that's far-fetched at the moment, but it is possible.
Yeah, that's really good. It's okay, I think we're good. Yeah, really good answer. Promising times, hopefully. But did anybody else want to speak to that as well?
Yeah, I think it's interesting thinking about Japan, isn't it? Because they actually used to have a culture of upcycling and reusing. I mean, that's what borrow was. But I guess that reflected poverty and earlier times. I think what we are sort of repositioning it now as actually being a celebration by valuing these natural fibre resources and reusing them. It's being repositioned as a positive thing rather than a reflection of poverty because you can't afford it. And I think this is what the big fast fashion brands traded on, our excitement about having new and having lots and that. But I think we're really over it. And I do feel that the reputation of these fashion business billionaires that have built a model on exploitation, I actually really think they are suffering major reputational damage now. And, people are looking for something that they have some certainty that isn't, we don't want to wear exploitation. And so I think, the storytelling around a brand and associating it with people and the craftspeople and the communities being looked after as a result of that, that is really what people are looking for now. I think I think we're over all the shallowness and the excitement, of it. Well, excitement in quote marks. And, in a way, Marie Kondo has highlighted that by, we've just loaded down with all this baggage and crappy stuff. And actually really what we want are just a few quality pieces that we can look at them and think, well, yes, that helped a community. I valued that. I'm going to look after it. And I think that's where we're heading. And, it might be a bit Pollyanna-ish, but I actually believe it. And I think the more people that we bring on side through these conversations, and just looking at what's happening with mending, suddenly it's trending. And, I think so we are moving in the right direction, I feel.
Yeah.
I've said my piece now.
That was really good. I like the rhyme at the end there with the mending and trending.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something real quick, adding on to that. I think definitely we're moving to the right direction, and by default, we sort of have to. But sadly, it hasn't been fast enough, because fast fashion has done such a phenomenal job of garnering billions of dollars by tricking people, brainwashing people into thinking they need it. So I think we can do the same thing, but obviously for the right reasons, not trick people or brainwash people, but generate awareness through the same techniques used by fast fashion, social media, if you really go to the heart of it, what is it that these people are seeking that they're consuming so much? It's validation, perhaps, right? Or, it's not always about trends. Sometimes it's about, people shop a lot because, and this is from my speaking from personal experience in the past, experiencing some kind of pain or trauma, you shop as therapy, right? That's why we call it retail therapy. Is it anxiety? For me, it was anxiety, depression, and some other things, and those are, or for some people, it's even things as basic as boredom or procrastination. I don't have something to do, okay, I'll go shop. And the appeal, like I mentioned earlier, is the glamour for a lot of fast fashion consumers and that age group and demographic that consumes so much. So if you turn that on its head and do the reverse, yes, you can give them a glamour and that, but sustainably. Do you want a nice pair of jeans? Here's a nice pair of jeans, but guess what? You're preventing human trafficking at the same time by buying these jeans, and you are they're made ethically. There's minimal environmental damage. So I think that is using the techniques of fast fashion companies as well as influencers. I mean, they use a lot of celebrities, right, to sell a lot of products. So if this industry is definitely growing, and I can see more and more celebrities are right, wearing, like Outland Denim, as James mentioned earlier. So the more that happens as this industry grows, I think that in places like Japan, I think it'll eventually catch on. Hopefully not as a trend. We want this to be the new standard, and how, for the rest of humanity, how we produce and consume clothing. But yeah, I think it'll happen organically, and hopefully this pandemic will be the beginning of speeding things up so that we get to that place.
Can I just add in there too, Nina, that I now do, probably because of the line of work I'm in, I do now have people apologize to me when they're wearing certain brands of clothing. And so, but what it demonstrates is that people are now becoming more aware of, this is becoming less socially acceptable to be seen in certain brands' clothing. So I got to say, it's absolutely catching on. And I think the days of it being, an acceptable thing to buy cheap for the sake of it being cheap are disappearing.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, James, that people literally apologize to you. People apologize to me too when I walk into a room, like, oh my gosh, don't be angry, but I got this top from H&M. I'm like, relax, it's fine. Okay. It's the big big brands we should be worrying about. I'm not the fashion police, sustainable fashion police.
Yeah.
feel like you guys, provide some really good responses there. Might move on to another question. We got one from Cora. She had an original one that got answered in the other earlier question, but she sent me another one asking about in terms of getting involved in sustainable fashion activism during times of COVID-19. There's not a lot you can do inside your house apart from just emailing companies. So she's wondering if there's any other suggestions that you guys had.
Personally, what I can just suggest is, there is a very good power in stories. So at the moment, people are really spending a lot of time on social media and so on. So if they can take time and then write some great stories, like the work that James is doing is quite very amazing. What Nina is doing is quite amazing. So those stories, sharing them on social media, imagine like if you have 200 friends, and if you share that on social media, at least 50 friends will be able to see those stories. And probably 10 will click on the website and they will go and read about what they're doing. And that's the first point of contact for them to be able to know what's happening in the sustainable fashion.
Can I just add on to that as well, if it's okay? I just wanted to suggest a few practical things that people can do. We mentioned clearing out your wardrobes. Start restyling your clothes, because the idea is that we want, hopefully, after the restrictions are lifted and the pandemic is over, that people carry on with these new skills, right? So now is a good time to do your research. Which brands do you want to shop with moving forward? And you can share that as well. You have Outland Denim and all the ethical brands that you can find in different areas. So not just for casuals, but for corporate clothes, you think, where am I going to get my underwear from? Where am I going to get my pajamas from? So you have that list there and ready, and you can share it with your friends. And any new skills that you acquire, you can share those as well. And just to ensure that you carry on with this new way of being.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Continuing on what we've kind of started during this time. I think we're getting to that last little bit now. So we just have to limit it to one more question. I'll go with the one that Andrea's asked. So she said that one of the biggest arguments that she hears against ethical and sustainable fashion movements is people who have lower incomes. They might not be able to afford these more ethical and slower fashion sort of clothes. So just wondering how you guys would respond to that. We might start with Jane for that one.
Well, I think, yes, it is seen as sometimes a position of privilege, but I guess, to have ethical fashion. But as James points out, his price point is actually quite reasonable, really. But that is where I guess I have always had a focus on wearing pre-loved. And I mean, that is a way, there's so many beautiful things that are being, devalued. You can find there's a lot of treasure there. So if you can't afford to buy, the nice packaged new brand that's labelled ethical, well, pre-loved and sharing and clothes swaps and all that kind of thing, that's a way to be really ethical. One of the more controversial things that I say is that, because there's a whole lot of focus on organic fibre. Oh, it's got to be organic, otherwise it's, it's not ethical. And it's just kind of like the ultimate in organic is buying secondhand, because it's already been washed a whole lot. It's not adding, its production is not adding new chemicals to the environment or anything like that. So I think it's actually a broad definition about what is ethical, and it does include these lovely products with a great story to tell, but also it does include wearing what you've already got and keeping that going. I mean, I've got a personal philosophy of trying to wear clothes out, and let me tell you, it's quite hard to actually get something to the point where you can't wear it anymore. So, I mean, it's how you define ethical that comes into it. I think that's very ethical to wear what you've got until it wears out. That's doing ethical fashion. You don't have to go and buy something new to do it. So that's my perspective. I'd just like to briefly touch on the question from Rebecca Lewis, who said, do we worry that once we're allowed outside again, everyone will go mad buying up and making up for not spending? Maybe some people will, but I think we've really had that idea that we go and spend money to, you know, and gather things. It's sort of like the modern hunter-gatherer, where you go and you collect as much as you can. I think our values have shifted now, and I think that's not as important. You know, we're valuing health and community and communication and getting out and about. So I think I would like to think that there won't be all this mad spending, but having said that, a lot of spending has already been going on while we've been in hibernation, because, you know, people have been buying a lot of tech and a lot of leisure wear online. So that's what I'd say in response to that.
Yeah, it's really, really good points. And maybe people, all these delays in sending stuff out, people will have their fix, you know, from these things they've bought, still waiting for, so they won't buy as much as soon as things open up again. Did anybody else want to speak to that as well, or should we go to one last question?
Well, I really wanted to add something there. I think what the most important thing is just trying. If you're trying and making an effort to, you know, buy sustainably, buy ethically, then that's sort of enough. Like, we can't be perfect in every avenue of our life. You know, I've been trying to buy everything ethically and sustainably for many years now. And it's you know, I've been a student for the majority of my life, it feels like now. And then when I wasn't a student, I earned, you know, a reasonable Cambodian wage. So it's just about, you know, it's about trying. And, you know, every now and again, I would save up money to be able to buy something that I really wanted. Otherwise, what Jane said, I would just go with, pre-loved items. So as long as we're trying, then that's all we can sort of do, because I think it's quite rare for an individual to be able to buy absolutely everything in their life, and making sure it's ethical. So, yeah.
And if I can comment also, I think, you know, we're a brand selling a $200 jean, and we're really well aware that not everybody can afford a $200 jean, though, you know, there's efficiencies with scale, and, you know, we're producing small runs, and in comparison to the big guys, you know, big guys are producing hundreds of thousands of units a day. And as more people come across to supporting movements like what Outland Denim is, and what Pemba and so many are doing, you will see price points come back a little bit. They're never going to be $30. You know, Refinery 29 did a fantastic, some research on the issue of denim in particular. And their findings a few years ago was that if you bought a denim jean off the retail shelf for less than $100 US, you could be guaranteed there was exploitation in the supply chain. That doesn't mean if you spend more, there isn't, but I think it's a really good point to make. And I guess this is very controversial, and it's why I like the answers that I've heard from the other panelists tonight. But I guess, is it okay for you to have cheap fashion at the expense of somebody else? Is the question that I want to pose. You know, so yes, you might not be able to afford it, but there's also another cost that someone else is paying for you. So that's not any kind of judgment, because we're all actually a part of the problem, myself very much included in that. So it's complex, and it's going to take time.
Yeah, I just wanted to put in one quick contribution on that note, with regards to not only acting as individuals, but to scale it. Okay, so one of the things I do is I give talks and workshops to high school, right, in the country. And each time I do that, I suggest to the teachers that we should do a clothes swap afterwards. And I give them a guide on how to run clothes swaps so that they can continue doing it in the schools and other, can I use the word branches, in other parts of the city of that particular college. Of that particular school, sorry. And this is a way to scale the concept of sustainability, because they start through a fun activity like a clothes swap, and I make it into a party, right? So I make it a party for the kids, you know, cookies, ice cream, whatever, have a clothes swap music, and they love it. And then that engages them in these issues. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because if we start to systemize some of these activities, I think that's a way for it to grow and expand. And through systemizing it, it also opens up opportunities for these conversations that we're having. You know, yes, it's just a clothes swap, but you know, it's part of sustainability, and then they start to look at the ethics behind it and so on and so forth. Talking about price point as well, if we systemize things like clothes swaps, it doesn't have to be a clothes swaps, but that sort of thing. You know, for example, a single mother who has young children who grow fast, and she buys clothes from, let's say, Kmart or Target, where, you know, these are clothes made by people who are being exploited. If instead like we have clothes swaps on a regular in our councils, in our communities, in our schools, in our churches, religious groups, whatever, in our local neighborhoods, then that reduces the amount of clothing that they have to buy, and it saves them money as well. So I think systemizing some of these processes is a good way to go if we can.
Yeah. You're all going to hate me for dropping this one right on 7:30 as we're meant to finish, but this is a thought to leave you with from me. What is the, I guess, greatest challenge I see with slowing down in our, you know, consuming of fashion, is that there is potentially a catastrophic social impact of that. That often doesn't get talked about during these kinds of conversations. So if we buy less, people don't have work. In Cambodia, there's 800,000 people that are so reliant upon it. That is already, we're seeing Cambodians coming back into the country across the border with COVID-19. This is happening in every country where they've been working abroad, don't have any work any longer. And so now we have these people. If we slow down in our consuming of fashion, we need to have a solution. We can't just stop buying fashion, because if we do that, we are going to have a way greater problem on our hands. And then the environmental impact of idle hands and poverty is huge. So we may not even change the environmental outcome of slowing down in our consuming of fashion. There is a chance of that, and there's some great research around it as well. That's just a thought to leave you with. I'm sorry.
And what do you think the solution is, though? Because, you know, we really shouldn't be just buying for the sake of it, should we? So what can you suggest something?
Consumerism is the solution, in my opinion. But it's like Richard Branson builds a rocket and flies to the moon. Why did he do that, and how could he do that? He did that because he had a vision, and he was able to resource that vision to come to reality. We're talking about really simple things: the use of fibres, innovation around fibres, landfill. You know, what's sitting right behind Justine's head in that picture is this massive pile of textile waste mixed with all this other stuff. You know, we've been working on these issues as a brand. How do we solve these issues? And there is ways. And, you know, we're a small brand, underfunded small brand that has been able to find small solutions every step of the way. Why? Because we genuinely want to change it. And so as we resource it, as customers start supporting brands like us, you put more money into circularity within this movement to those who are here to solve the problem. So I think consumerism is the problem, because people need work, but we need to innovate around the way we produce our clothing, the fibers we use, and then how we dispose of those clothing so that there's something positive at the end. That's real circularity. Nobody's gotten there yet. But if we work together, I believe that we can.
Can I just add on something really quickly? I think consumerism is the solution. You're absolutely right. But I think it's still a temporary solution. This is why I think I talked about approaching things holistically and internationally, because it's really, really complex, right? However, I think if we try to solve these problems, and we need government to do it. That's the truth. We need government, we need consumers, we need industry. And if we all work together, if these three elements work together, it would take a while, but I think it would be solved eventually, not necessarily long-term through consumerism. You know, it would be through development, where those, the global South, nations in the global South, were able to develop in a way that they can build their own industry. And when I say industry, I don't mean consumers industries necessarily, whatever it is for them. You know, each society, each nation is different. So yes, consumerism in the short term, but not as a long-term solution, kind of as a way to help those communities develop and become self-sufficient, so that it's not a case where they're relying on Western cultures for their development and their survival.
But I guess you could look at those developing nations as really just a suburb as well, because we are globalized now, whether we like it or not. We're utilizing the resources of every country in every other country. So what if we were creating products that left not just the people, but also the planet in a better position as a result of it having been created than if it wasn't created? And I really genuinely believe that's possible. I know some of the research and some of the testing we've been doing on different projects. We believe that we're close to cracking very small parts of that. And we put small amounts of money into these kinds of projects compared to what the big companies would be putting into research. It's because I guess you got to have the belief to begin with that it's possible. And I'd feel like this is an area that's just been overlooked. And I'd say to all the entrepreneurs out there, this is a massive, massive opportunity that sits here right now. The way that we deal with all industry, but particularly the one we're talking about tonight, fashion industry, textiles and the waste, and creating that circularity, man, when we crack that, the fashion industry could be the industry that sets the standard for many other industries and creates massive environmental and social change. So I guess I probably still think that the long-term solution is actually consumerism. As we buy, we know that everything we consume has a positive impact on both all three elements of sustainability: social, environmental, and economically. I guess we then stop measuring just the one line that seems to get measured, which is profit in the profiting country, the economic impact in the profiting country. We don't even measure that across our supply chain, whether it was profitable or not. It's just some really small mind shifts that have to happen first. And when people's hearts change, they'll start investing into these kinds of things. And then we'll start to see the results that all of us here dream of.
A really good way to end it, I think. A bit of a controversial, but interesting point for us all to.
Apologies, everybody.
That makes really interesting. And as an economics student, I find it, the underlying, I guess, construct of the economy that and how you try to balance that out, make it more sustainable. It's really interesting. I guess we'll have to wrap it up there. So I just want to mention that, so all those questions we didn't get to, we will, we've got a record of them all, and we'll try to either respond to them ourselves as Oxfam UQ and send those out to you guys. Or also, I'm sure that if you got in contact with any of the panelists, like they've got information on their websites on how to get in contact with them, they would be happy to answer any further questions. And also, we have recorded this as well. So if you did register, we'll send the recording out to your the email that you registered with. And on that note, there's nothing I've missed. I'd just like to thank all our panelists once again. Thank you, Pemba, Nina, James, Jane, and Justine. It's just more comments coming into. Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for everyone who came along.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And you guys did such a great job of organizing this, so thank you so much.